just like to point out the people responsible. They are here. And one is here. So during the next coffee break, you can ask questions, but you can also read the leaflets that are on the chairs, and you'll know more about the tour that is offered before dinner this evening. All right, it's 3:30, and we will terrorize you with Swedish punctuality. Because we only have 45 minutes and the next plenary session contains a lot. It contains many different perspectives. It also contains the results of an expert group process that we will learn more about. So the third plenary session is about artists' conditions and livelihoods, and you understand that the topic is very broad. We also know that it's not a policy area that's joint for the European member states, but it's a policy area that has been subjected to this process where the member states are sharing experiences and trying to get closer to each other. And how such an expert group process works is one of the perspectives that we will learn more about during this session. And I would like to introduce, we have 4 members, 4 speakers in all during this session, but it will be divided in 2 parts. So first we will get 2 presentations, and then I will ask additional speakers on stage, and we will have more of a discussion. And the 2 presentations will be about specifically this expert group process and 2 participants in this process. So the first one is Heidi Meissnitzer, who is the Counsellor on Arts Culture at the Permanent Representation of Austria at the European Union. And the second one is Amanda van Rij, who is the Senior Policy Advisor to the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science of the Netherlands. So please welcome Heidi and Amanda on stage.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and good afternoon to everybody. Many thanks to the Swedish Presidency for the invitation to Umeå. It's a lovely city, it seems to be, and especially the interest in the work of the OMC expert group. Before, I think it's important, I see many of my colleagues here who are familiar with the open method of coordination and also with the work plan, but maybe some of you, it's good to briefly mention and provide some background information and to give a little bit of context. So the previous work plan identified the working condition as an essential work to look into. And the work plan is the strategic instrument for cooperation of matters of identified priorities of shared interest. And it defines also how to implement and how to work on these identified priorities. And one of these working methods is the open method of coordination, which is really a proven and well-functioning working method. Maybe it's also important to mention that we are working with work plans since we have been working since the last 20 years. So it's quite an experience as well as with the open method of coordination. It's a proven and well-functioning working method, and that's also important. It's based on voluntary participation and cooperation, as mentioned, for policy area with low EU competence. Stefan referred already to it. All member states, in our work, for the topic on the working condition, all member states participated and nominated experts, which reflects the relevance and the importance of the topic. It's not always the case, but for the cultural topics, it's always more than 20. And I have to highlight how important it is that member states nominate experts and that the experts are really committed. I also will point out that it's for everybody of us additional work. We do it to our jobs, and for some it's then a little bit more difficult to continue and to remain engaged. But in this group we have wonderful experts, and some of them are here, and I would really express many thanks to them for their commitment and the work done so far. It's not yet done, so I cannot really present results, but I think I can provide an understanding and also an overview where we are and what are the challenges ahead of us. And of course we have some preliminary conclusions and also to look to next steps. So the OMC started in September 21. So far we had 6 meetings. We still started during the COVID crisis. So 3 meetings were online. And 3 meetings were in persons, which is of course much better to have this personal contact and to exchange between and directly. The basis of our work is a mandate. It's provided by the Commission and approved by the Cultural Affairs Committee in the Council. And in advance, it's also very important, the Commission is commissioning or issuing a very comprehensive study on the topic, so that's which serves then as a very good basis of experience and knowledge for all of us. That's also usual to the OMC process, that the civil society is also dealing with the topic, and it's also coming up with a report. It's the Voices of Culture, which is also the structured dialogue, and I think some of you are part of it. It's became also clear that the working conditions are a very highly topical issue. It was already before, but it became especially during the COVID crisis, and we are still in a post-COVID scenario. So many international stakeholders and also the European Union, not only the Commission, but also the European Parliament is looking into the topic, but also UNESCO, OECD, and for this week it's the International Labour Organization that dedicated this week's conferences also on the topic of arts and the entertainment sector. It's important that we build on all this existing knowledge and that we pool all this expertise and ongoing work, and hopefully contribute to something which is useful for the sector. So what we are expected to come up with, the OMC is always invited to present a report. In our case, we are considering not only the working conditions, but of course a little bit wider ecosystem, and to contribute to fair and well-functioning labor markets and welfare systems. So our focus is on identifying good practices in the member states and then prepare policy recommendation for the different governance levels and for the sector itself. Then what are the challenges? As many of you are familiar, but maybe it's good to mention them or repeat them quickly. That's precarious and fragile structures. They are well known and became more apparent, as mentioned, during the COVID crisis, and amplified the deficit of the structural deficits. Then there are different deployment status. Some are employed, some are freelancers, some have hybrid or even multiple contracts ongoing, and it's not only one job, different jobs with different contracts, and this is quite challenging with regard to the social protection. Then, of course, it's also the nature of income, yeah, depending if you're employed or not employed, or you have a mixed contract situation. It's fluctuating. There is unpaid, in many cases, unpaid work, and there's a lot of overwork. And I think there is still a need, even it sounds very simple, to raise awareness for that artistic work is the result of work and of efforts, and they create value, which creates copyrights, and it has to be remunerated. I mean, there are many cases that artists are invited to present their work and then offered visibility. I mean, that's important, but we have to be in mind that that's not enough. Then there was, from the study, it came out, one of the key findings was there was this general lack of security and missing social protection, depending on your contracts. And it's also important to highlight that in the member states there are different systems, different development states of both, not only in the member states, but also regarding the various cultural and creative sectors. But we identified common challenges and key priorities and the shared interest. I mean, that's really the basis always of an OMC, that there is a shared interest to come up with solutions or find solutions and bettering the situation together. Let me see, I think it's now the next slide. So, I need some water. So we decided, since the scope and the complexity of this topic, to structure our work along identified priorities. In our case, it was really done by experts, and it was a joint brainstorming. What is the interest, and what is the shared interest? And it came out, it's on the status and on social protection systems. It's the topic of fairness and skills development. It's very important to develop a career and what is needed what kind of skills are needed, and then artistic freedom. For all these four subgroups, we identified, there were named subgroup chairs and also deputies to the subgroup chairs, and one is here, Amanda, who did a great job on the topic of artistic freedom and will present it later. We have to take into account, of course, cross-cutting issues like equality, diversity, cross-border mobility. It's very essential because everybody knows that artistic work, it's really going beyond the national situation and national states. And then another important challenge is the digital and the greening transition and lessons learned from the COVID. To collect data on the situation in the member states. As I mentioned, there were 27 member states participated, so the situations are quite different. So we decided to prepare questionnaires, first in subgroups, but then over summer we decided to do a very comprehensive questionnaire on these four topics, which quite detailed questions. So we gathered a lot of information, and this we had ready after the summer. And we find out that the situations in the member states are really very, very different. And but all of them are interested in new initiatives or already have ongoing initiatives. Some member states are included social reforms under their recovery and resilience programs, for example, the Czech, the Romanian, I think it's also Spain, and Cyprus is working on something, and Cyprus was very much interested in sharing experiences with other member states. We have member states which are already much more advanced, like Germany. They already have a law going back in the 80s, but also France, Belgium have a quite advanced system, but also revising it. And this is why the status of artists and the social security was one of the challenging subgroup topics. Yeah. And we found out that the status of artists is a potential way to regulate the working conditions by public authorities. But the challenge is how to define artists. And member states have different approaches, a very broad one, a specific one, and a lot of are referring to the UNESCO definition, going back to the 80s. But here we are, in our questionnaire, we had a lot of questions, detailed questions on how is the situation in the countries. And in the report, there will be a table how the member states did it and how they define their status according to, I can only name some, either it's an education, it's the income, it's by an authority or by practicing, yeah. But the situation is that an artist can practice, can have a degree, but maybe cannot have an income. As mentioned, the income can be fluctuating. It can be for months there is no income. It can even be a year where there is no income. And that the status is providing access to benefits like social protection. And it came out during the COVID crisis that some member states had really difficulties to define their numbers, yeah, or the size of the sectors. And this was very important to prepare financial aid measures. Yeah, if you don't know, and also not to know the requirements of the sector. So I think it's still. It's very important to work on the status, but there are very different approaches in the member states. And what I think we will succeed to come up is with a very good overview, the different approaches and ongoing initiatives in the member states, so that it's really exchange experiences, get inspired and learn from each other. And it's not working that one system is automatically working in another member state. There are also different social protection schemes are in place, but not covering all aspects. So we are looked into, I think it's very important for unemployment, sickness, age, care duties. It's not only for the female or for children, it's there are many other care duties where it would be important to have them in some way regarded. So there is a recommendation that we should work on a framework, and it's the question if it could be even an European framework, providing guidelines and minimum standards, of course, for non-binding measures, which cover relevant areas to improving the working conditions. This is for the first, for our first subgroup. Then there is fairness. Fairness, it's also it's getting more and more attention. But there is, and that's maybe surprising, no commonly accepted definition or neither a concept. For us, it's a broad, we have a broad approach. It's not only fair pay, but fair pay, it's very important. But it goes beyond fair pay. It's focused on fair and decent terms and conditions. It needs a fair regulatory environment, fair terms of contracts, and we are looking into it. And there are also some member states have already some guidelines, toolkits, handbooks, which could be shared. Then another important topic is skills development. The cultural and the creative labor markets are dynamic, changing, and also concerning as providing the labor force very important market. We all live in very stormy times, and this is also a little bit for the case for the labor market. That's first it was the global pandemic. With the war, there came increasing energy prices. It's a huge challenge for the market, and but especially the greening. It's a challenge, and also the digital. Yeah, metaverse, artificial intelligence are bringing really new requirements. What people have to know and should know. So there is a clear recommendation on a systematic and lifelong learning approach for CCS labor market, and also to invest in it. That's really something important, and this year it's also the European Year of Skills, and I think it's very important, and we looked also into this topic. Then it's artistic freedom, but this I will leave to Amanda. And then I come already to an end. It's what are the next step and some preliminary conclusions. We will present our report before summer, and hope then it will be reflected as broadly as possible. There is certainly a need to continue with this topic, yeah, and it's also important that we combine our efforts. I mentioned it in UNESCO, OECD, ILO, the European Parliament, stakeholders are working in this, and we have to pull and combine all our efforts and continue. We are all very happy that in the new work plan, which is from 23 until 26, this topic is also foreseen, and there are actions foreseen, and so the work needs to go on. And I also have to highlight that many of the issues raised require action at member states level, and that it goes also beyond culture ministers. So we really have to reach out. And I remember we had a very interesting presentation at our last meeting, which took place at the end of January. Spanish presented its initiative, and they highlighted that they had 8 different ministries involved. And I think that's more or less where we have to take this into account in the future. So and now I pass on to.
Thank you very much, Heidi, for trying to summarize this very broad topic, and also stressing at the very end, I mean, how many different sectors and areas that play into this perspective. I think it's very important to think about not only how many member states, but also how many ministries, agencies are involved when we're looking at this topic. Amanda, please.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. Well, my name is Amanda van Rij, and I work at the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science. And I was indeed a deputy chair for the topic of freedom of artistic expression in this OMC group as a sub-topic. I will first start off by telling you about the definition of what actually is artistic freedom. UNESCO defines artistic freedom as the freedom to imagine, create and distribute diverse cultural expressions, free of governmental censorship, political interference, or the pressure of non-state actors. It includes the right of all citizens to have access to these works, and it is essential for the well-being of societies. This incorporates the following rights: the right to create without censorship or intimidation, the right to have artistic work supported, distributed and remunerated, the right to freedom of movement, the right to freedom of association, and the right to the protection of social and economic rights, and the right to participate in cultural life. So why was this topic included, and why should this topic be included in the OMC report? Well, it's first of all because the extent of artistic freedom determines the scope in which people can create art and can perform artistic activities. It is therefore an important aspect of the working conditions of professionals in the cultural and creative sector. You could say that by artistic expression, we can ask ourselves difficult questions about ourselves, about the world that we are living in, and we can address challenging topics or even topics that are taboo. Artistic expression is a medium by which we examine new ideas, experience diverse viewpoints, and hold a mirror up to ourselves, both as individuals and as societies. Therefore, artistic freedom is to be considered an integral part of a flourishing democratic society. This is actually also what we have been discussing about the whole morning. Artistic freedom is also a way to express our common heritage, and by that it can create connections, it can create understanding and empathy between people. In that way, it is also to be considered a fundamental aspect of our cultural rights, and in these times that is extremely important to consider. So what have we done as an OMC group? First of all, we did research. We read several reports of NGOs, of the European Parliament, of the UNESCO, of course. Also, we sent out a questionnaire to the member states to see how they protect the right to artistic freedom in their countries. We also collected challenges and best practices from the different member states. And I can already unveil that our conclusions were that the right to artistic freedom has a fragile nature and that there is a necessity to strengthen it. And why is that? Because artistic freedom is under threat. First of all, this is because it is being influenced by religion and by the local moral norms prevailing in a certain society at a certain time. This makes it very adaptable to change, and it creates legal uncertainty, and it brings insecurities for artists and professionals working in the cultural and creative sector, especially for the ones working across the borders. In addition to this, we see a growing tendency by governments, also in the European Union, to restrict the right to freedom of artistic expression. For example, by anti-terrorism legislation, blasphemy laws, and laws that prohibit and criminalize insults to the state, including national symbols. Also, there are cases of governments taking over administrative control of national museums and cultural institutions to ensure that they favor artworks with nationalistic or a pro-governmental message in their exhibition. So taking these, but also other threats into account, our subgroup came up with a list of recommendations that we can divide up in three main categories. And as Heidi said, since it's all preliminary, I cannot go too much in depth, but I can tell you a little bit about the three categories. So the first is on how to better protect artistic freedom both at European and at national level, and both in legislation and in policy practices. For example, policy practices on how to prevent too much political influence on funding of cultural expression. Sweden actually has a very good practice for this that is called the arm's length principle, and we will mention it in our report. I will not explain all the details, but it basically comes down to that the professionals themselves in the cultural and creative sector decide to what and to whom cultural funding is allocated. Then the second category is a recommendation on how to set up an observatory system at European level to keep track of the state of play of artistic freedom in every member state. An idea could, for example, be to have this done by the agency of the European Union for Fundamental Rights, the FRA, that is based in Vienna. The last recommendation is actually a very broad one. Member states should enable access, cultural participation and practice both for the public and the artist. This recommendation aims to enhance access to both proactively participate in arts and cultural activities, as well as to participate to these activities as an audience or as a public. A first step for this is, of course, to create interest in these activities. And in developing this interest, the educational institutions can and should have an important role. Secondly, boundaries that prevent access to cultural activity should be reduced as much as possible. A good practice for this in the Netherlands is, for example, that we provide subsidies for low-income households to attend cultural activities. And also we have a good library system. I have to blow my nose, sorry. The recommendation also aims at equal opportunities for funding for cultural activities. For example, by taking away linguistic, technological and cultural and social barriers. Malta actually has a good practice for this recommendation. They developed a so-called resource pack. It's called Right to Culture, and it exists basically of a toolkit of information that aims at helping cultural and public organizations identify obstacles that stand in the way of inclusive funding of arts, but also inclusive project management and program development. And it has the aim of helping to develop strategies and tools to address these obstacles. So this is actually a tip of the wheel, as they call it, I think, of our recommendations and conclusions. And you will read all about it in the report once it's published.
Thank you very much, Amanda. We look forward to the report. And I would like to invite two additional speakers on stage. Mika Romanus, Director General of the Swedish Arts Grants Committee, and Linnea Henriksson, artist and songwriter. And Linnea, I would like to start with you.
Yes.
When you're listening to this very broad bureaucratic process, it's about your daily life.
Yes,
it's
it is.
about what you do. How do you react to what has been presented?
Well, for me, since it is my profession, this is kind of like common knowledge. And I'm so glad that you do this work so that everyone could understand the insecurities that you have working in a cultural profession, and how easily someone can just pull the rug under you and suddenly you stand there and has no social securities. It doesn't, like, for me, example, I'm a pop artist. I do commercial pop music here in Sweden. And I'm frankly quite well known. But that doesn't mean that I can pay for like when I invest in my product, my music, so that it's like everyone can hear it. I need you all to hear it so that you would know what I do, so that we can connect. I mean, culture and music has such a big value for societies and for everyone. The connection is the thing. That's why I do it. But if I have no security at all, and I can't even, when I upload my music, I'm signed to a big record label, but even though when I upload it to streaming services, I know that I won't get the money back. It's more of a promotion to get the gigs. And sometimes you don't get back the money when you go out on tour either. So you see that as promotion to get someone to find your music to stream it. But if everything is promotion, and it doesn't matter what level you are on, you can always get offered a job by, this is good for you, more people will find you. Then suddenly my business is not about the same currency as you have, or like you don't talk about money. We have another currency that is not connected to like the Swedish krona that I would like to have for doing my profession. We have the currency of public, that people find my audience, and people think that you're well paid just because people know about you, or that they find your music, but actually we just give it away now for the bigger value of what music can do for other things.
And if I ask the question about freedom,
Yeah.
I mean, for you, you told me earlier you don't feel restricted right now by censorship.
No, and I mean, I'm in a privileged situation coming from Sweden and living here, and we have a history of taking care of our culture. We can even brag about the music export.
But when I say freedom, what comes in mind for you in terms of what limitations on freedom do you experience?
Well, for example, I became a mother 4 years ago, and to have preschool, I just thought about it just before I came here. That's the first time that I actually felt that, wow, I'm a part of the system, and I can actually, I can proudly say that I had this right to put my child in preschool as we have here in Sweden. My profession has not at all given me that security that I felt that I have something to hold on to. It's always about what I can make for myself, and if I don't take the job, someone else will. So it's not the job won't have bigger payments or anything. It's just someone else takes the job instead. So for me, artistic freedom, if I don't have anything to stand on, if I, like now I have a child, so I have to have a payment to, for everyone, pay the bills, buy new socks, get free time, get to visit my parents, just fundamental rights. But it is a problem when artistic or professions in culture, I can often hear that I should just be happy that I can do what I love.
So before I ask,
And that makes me less and less, that the freedom is taken away from me. Suddenly, I mean, one day you won't have any strength left to create.
Before I ask Mika a question, Amanda, you wanted to comment.
Very shortly. I was saying in my presentation that artistic freedom is a very important aspect of working conditions of professionals working in the sector. But as I hear from you now, it is also the other way around. That working conditions are very important for freedom as well.
There is this picture about that great art comes from suffering. And it's not that nice to be the person that has to suffer all the time. It's much more fun to have, to buy the socks with no worries.
Mika, the Arts Grant Committee is partly responsible for trying to fill the gaps of the livelihood and the conditions for artists in Sweden. How do you react to what you've been hearing about the joint European process, but also with other perspectives that you have? What would you add to the discussion?
First of all, I must say I'm very happy that the OMC group are addressing this issue with the social and economic conditions for the artist and connecting that to artistic freedom. I think that really shows that even though if you live in a peaceful country, the artists still have a position that not always make the freedom as great as needed because of the system. So in Sweden we have a special government agency, the Swedish Arts Grants Committee, that's actually working with grants towards the artists, but we also have the task to get and gather information about the artists and the livelihood. And what we can see, which is also addressed in this report, is that the artists' conditions is so many different parts of the life is actually affecting the artist's life, the social security system, the copyright regulations, the possibility to organize, and all these components put together actually creates a more stable position for the artist, which will get the artist the possibility to actually create at a larger freedom.
I'm glad that you mentioned copyright, because it's often omitted when we talk about artistic freedom, and it's very linked to what you have been sharing, Linnea, with popularity or the quantity of the audience being a currency or something that your success is measured by. But in the end, copyright is about your ability to have an income from what you have actually done. And now, I mean, we won't make this right now into a discussion about streaming services and so on, but there has been a lot of changes for commercial musicians. And how would you just reflect on the aspect of copyright and the possibility to own your own work?
Well, I guess it of course, with everything, it's a complex question. And like, as you said, with streaming services, that's how very many people consume music that I represent today. And, well, I love the idea that it's, you can find everything, that it's very important to spread the music, to make people connect with the music. But there is a problem with the payment methods. It is not based on that the fact that it actually is replacing what was before the record buyers. It's based more on other, on other things that makes the value very, very, very small. And as I said, I know here I'm investing all my money and all my energy and all my love to this new record that I'm making. And I just know that I can do the calculations. And I see that this is not, I won't get back money there. I need to find money somewhere else to pay for my record. And I just find that to be a fundamental problem, that is the way it is.
And Mika, this is, let's say, then within a commercial field, and you are also covering other parts of the whole spectrum of creativity and artistic production in Sweden. With the research that you're doing, how would you react on the changing situation?
Well, we can see that the changing situation and the increased digitalization and of course opens new arenas for a lot of artists to show and promote their work. But at the same time, we can also find that a lot of times it's not the artist that actually is making the money. And the position of the artists tend to be weaker in negotiations now than prior to this. But in the European sense, I think the DSM directive actually is something that gives the artists a stronger position for negotiations. And then, of course, it's important to see how the national legislation will actually take care of this situation and hopefully use the directives writings towards strengthening the artist positions in negotiations. But of course it's too early to say, but we have at least can acknowledge that the directive is there and look at it.
And then OMC process, I mean, as we said at the very beginning, this is not it's not a joint policy area in the European Union. It's an area where we're trying to get closer to each other, learn from each other, and trying to find a common ground. But when this process, now we haven't seen the final recommendations. Yes, but Heidi, would you say that this is an area where we're very far away from each other in terms of how we define things such as artistic freedom? You talked about the definition of an artist, the different support mechanisms in place. How far away are we in this issue?
As I tried to highlight, there are different approaches. For example, how to define an artist. Yeah, there are broader concepts and there are smaller or really professional artists. Yeah, but is someone an artist without? Maybe it's not creating copyrights. Yeah, but it's also an artistic work. So I think there is really a common understanding that the working conditions have to be improved. and have to be, it's unsecured. For some part, inequalities are everywhere, yeah? But a huge part of artists don't profit, don't get their work paid fairly, and cannot afford a decent life from the artistic work. And
if I ask you, Amanda, did you feel that there is a willingness among the member states to actually learn from each other in terms of best practice in this field?
Well, in the field of artistic freedom, yes, I did feel that there was a lot of inspiration. And for example, we also saw that quite a lot of member states actually have artistic freedom as a distinct right in their constitution. But there are also many member states that do not have this. And as we discussed this morning, it has a fragile nature. So you can be glad as long as you have it, but it can change also by changing politics, political climate, etc. So I think it's good to make each other aware of the importance and to keep on cooperating in this field and inspire each other with good practices.
And Mika, from your perspective, from the national Swedish perspective, how willing are we, do you think, to adjust this policy area to a more European perspective and to actually learn from each other?
I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from each other, of course, and I think there's some parts of the report that would be more suitable to work with in Sweden for that we can push further on for fair practice or things like that would actually also change maybe the future way of expanding the field of the professional cultural field, connecting to the prior session about artistic freedom for whom. We also have to show that this is actually professions that you can also have a life with. I think that will also be something that will also benefit a greater and more diverse cultural life, because if the artist doesn't have a strong enough position that can actually get a livelihood, we will miss out on important artistry in the worst case.
Linnea, a final word to, you have a lot of cultural bureaucrats here, a message you would like to send to all of us?
Well, it's culture. That's the most beautiful thing we have. The way to express ourselves and to connect and to feel things. Maybe things we can't put in words, but when we just hear something or see something, then we just know. Use that inspiration that all of us working with it works with every day. I mean, you have the possibility to create something enormously beautiful with just making everything work even better. Just imagine all the new culture that we will explore and be a part of.
Thank you, everyone on the panel. And thank you for trying to keep this impossible task of squeezing this into 45 minutes. I'm very grateful for everyone was talking very quickly during this session, and I'm very grateful, and I hope that you now can just relax. We made it.
I actually know for a fact that there are, you can go to this place called Faucet, have a drink and keep on talking. So use the time and have a good time.
Very good. Thank you very much. During these 2 days, you see the speakers are receiving little boxes. I'm just going to tell you, everyone, what's inside the boxes. It's a vase called acorn. And it was designed by Astrid Henriksson in the 30s. She did this for acorns. Acorns are the fruits of oak trees. And she saw them as, the beginning of a new life, but also the beginning of growing something strong. Oak is the symbol of strength. But an acorn is something very vulnerable, and this vase is also very fragile and very vulnerable, but it's the beginning of strength. And during World War II, she saw this as the rebirth of a new, strong, democratic European order after the war. And we hope that the acorns you will develop in these small vases will be the beginning of something very strong in your own work. So that's what you're bringing with you from this conference. Now, at the very end of this day, here to conclude it is Georg Häusler. Ah, there you are. Thank you. We never had the opportunities to say hello. So I greet you on stage, and I leave the stage to you for concluding this day.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan, for leaving me this extremely easy job to wrap all this up after one day. But you just said, hand it over to the cultural bureaucrats, and I guess I'm a kind of an incarnation of that, representing the European Commission. I hope you all still are full of energy and listening mode, because this is what I will need in order to be able to communicate. Now, the method I'm doing this is, we are two colleagues here from the Commission, and we have distributed each other. We have been sitting in all the workshops, so we hope we got most of it. But you will have to bear with me, because I'm really just obviously emphasizing some main messages which were in these different workshops, in the plenaries, what people said. And so it's a very subjective, not in any view trying to represent now everything which has been said and discussed today. Now, to start was this morning, thank you to the organizer. What a start this was, with our colleagues from artist colleagues Farima and Olesia. I think this really put us right into the ice cold water of what is really at stake here. Because particularly when I was listening now to the last one, and you will see that's what I'm trying to make here in this presentation, this huge angle between the reality of most of us living in peaceful, wonderful communities and countries where everything is fine, except for some details. And then you have Farima and Olesia, who Farima with her song, I mean, really putting us in some very special mood, because I think the challenges she is facing and her example shows. I mean, this is for most of us movie stuff. It's very difficult even to realize what's going on there. Olesia, I mean, I don't know whether she's still around, but her list of perished artists, I mean, this is ice cold shiver on any human being, and it's saying and communicating so much more than a lot of studies and discussions could do. I mean, this is really, oof, you need to hold your breath. So this was a wake-up call this morning, which was very, very impressive. Now, I'm coming to the first workshop, the Artistic Freedom for Indigenous People. We obviously all have been put a little bit, those ones who arrived yesterday, already in the water of some difficulties the Sami population is facing here, and I think this workshop also took this as an example. Now, we had our colleague from the UN saying, this is about minimum standards, which is a right, which is there, and this is the law, and we just need to translate the law into deeds and into reality. So this is one side of the coin, which is obviously there. It works better in some areas than it does other, better in some countries than it does in other countries. Now, the thing of this inclusion of indigenous populations, and I think this we heard also from the colleague from Canada this afternoon, there is always this risk of inclusion into the society, into the reality of society, representing then the whole country, or just creating a ghetto and say, this is fine, we have some folkloric group here, they can do whatever they want in a certain area, and that's fine for us, and we don't need anything else. With that approach, we have kind of respected their constitutional rights, but have we really done the trick? I have my doubts about that. And I think this was very much in the discussion out there. It is representing a country. Take the example of Sweden. Sami is part of it. It's not some ghetto out of the reality. Now, interesting the discussion there also on the cross-border issue. So cross-border issue, Sami population again. Now the clear example, parts of it is in Russia, so there's an issue. But it's also the cross-border artistic expression. What is, is it sculpture? Is it painting? Are these different borderlines between the artistic expressions? Are they so strict, or can they be a bit more fluid? So it's a very interesting debate around there. A message we got, I think, from yesterday to today, let indigenous people take decisions, let them also be, in charge. Not somebody somewhere in a center, some boards of governor or policy decides. They should be part, again, inclusive part of those ones who take decisions. And then obviously there's also an interesting debate, the tension between cultural heritage and contemporary expression. Now, should indigenous people, indigenous art stay the way it was 10,000 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, or 10 years ago, or should there also be a development? And there seems to be a tension which is quite interesting. Obviously, there's an issue of loss of cultural identity. This is clear for all indigenous populations, First Nations in Canada and others. That's a real issue, and of course we can see that. And this is something which is a cross-cutting issue for all the panels. It's about money too. We need financing of projects, we need financing of artists, we need financing of infrastructure, we need financing of organization, there needs to be some money behind the words. The next workshop was building an inclusive community. That was Roger Wilson who presented us Black Lives Music, a British project. Very interesting experience. So Roger did something very interesting. He kind of portrayed himself and his own story, and with his own story he showed us the headway which was made in inclusion of race and gender issues, in this case in the United Kingdom. I think he left a very positive impression, saying there's no anger, there is no revenge, there is no, I'm not a destructive person, and we are not. So we say a lot of progress has been made. There needs to be much more progress still to come. And I think that was a very positive impression he left us with. He made a strong point on how important it is, again, come back to money and the possibility for children to get access to artistic expression, to have a teacher who tells them art, who tells them music, the notes, whatever. How important this is to have this type of inclusion for anybody, by the way, more the social inclusion now. It's not about race or gender. He made an interesting point, and he said something along the lines, sometimes you need to change your identity to fit into a system. So you cannot always be yourself. And how far this, I thought, after listening to many of the things today, can be in conflict with the artistic freedom. So what does an artist have to do in order to please? And I think he was very much making this point, that there is a certain art which pleases, which has the reputation, which has the support, which has I don't know what. Other art doesn't please, and how much does an artist have to change in order to fit into something which pleases? I think it's a very interesting concept, very interesting thought as well. He made a very good point as well on we need to become a little bit more clever in selling what we are doing. And he made a simple example that I thought was very telling. He said 50 years ago, when they wanted to sell a car, they said, this car is very fast, buy it. And that was the trick. nowadays to sell a car you need to do a little bit more. And he says the art is still very much in this, it's nice to listen to art and that's it, fine, just come and listen to my music or look at my paintings. We need to be a bit more clever than that. I thought that was an interesting thought. Now the next workshop was protecting artists under threat. And that was an interesting debate on if an artist loses his or her context. Take the example we had today of Farima. She or he has a right not to create art immediately. It's not some animal in a zoo which performs all the time under all conditions. No. People who lose all their background and their family and their lives and they come to another country, you cannot just say, please can you now paint a picture and express what's inside? No, it's sometimes they have real issues which are completely independent of that, or they just don't have the critical mass in them to produce anything. And that is also part of artistic freedom. An artist has the right not to perform or not to create. That is something I thought was a very interesting thought we heard today. Cultural infrastructure is fragile not only in times of crisis, not only fragile now in the examples we heard today of Iran and Ukraine. It's also fragile in the countries we know best. And this is something we need to look at. And there are things which need improvement. And there are things we need to look at. We cannot just say everything is fine here. There is a problem now in some countries we need to help. We have a real challenge, an uphill battle also in our own courtyard. Now, there were very practical things discussed also in this workshop, like visas. What can be done to, there's a problem because they can't travel or they can't come in because they don't have a visa. Who is responsible for that? Just talk to the responsible, talk to the member states and say, change your visa policy because it's stupid. But I think we also need to have this kind of strength to say these things, because it's not just to say there is a theoretical problem. No, there's a real problem. It can be addressed. And then there were in different workshops like saying, and I think it was even in the last one here, now politicians listen carefully and you are all these important people, you have the strength to change things. And that is true to a certain extent. There are things which can be changed and which can be addressed. You just need to sometimes knock also on the right door. I think we do from the European Commission and in the last group, I think on this OMC, you've heard about it a little bit, that there are things we're doing, including spending quite a bit of money on art and artists. Creative Europe is 2.4 billion euros, so it's not nothing. But obviously not everything can be done on the European level, but a lot of things can be done and we should address it there. Now, which brings me to the last one, which is the right to shine. Anybody who has been in this one obviously cried, because that was one you had to cry. It was Per Johansson who showed us his project, his life, what he has done, what he has achieved with integrating disabled people into a theater group and making them basically stars in this country, certainly. And how this changed perception, how this changed people, how this changed their parents, how this changed society. I mean, this was very, very, very impressive. So for those ones who didn't listen to this, if you have a chance, but then prepare your handkerchiefs because you will cry, because it is really breathtaking what he has been doing there. Now, just one on this one. There was, I guess, we didn't really discuss, so he was presenting it, but there was probably a little bit this conflict again between inclusion and ghetto. Meaning now, this is great for the disabled people who make the theater. This is great for Swedish society because they feel very happy about it, that this happens in Sweden, and they feel very proud to be part of this. But is it really something which kind of gets into society, or is it just something, oh, it's there, it's fine, it's wonderful, applaud, and that's it? It doesn't really change realities. I mean, we didn't have this debate, but I think it would be interesting to have it, because there were some others from other countries where similar things happened, but it very much stayed a ghetto thing. Now, then we had the plenary there this afternoon, that one just after lunch, where we had, just for your memory, representative Ukraine, somebody from the UK and somebody from Canada. Just a few thoughts on that. I think, obviously, the representative of Ukraine, as you know, again, this carries us all away, and this is something where we all strongly feel, and you were very impressive in presenting all this. And you said something interesting, how the war changed the role of culture. When before, culture was just like it is probably most of our countries, it's part of amusement, it's part of our, entertainment, it's part of what we like, it's part of what we admire, etc. And in what you were explaining then, how, overnight culture suddenly becomes part of the fighting strengths of Ukraine, part of, showing the strengths of your society, of your people, part of also needed for people in order to support all these atrocities happening around them. I think that is really very impressive to see how culture, what a role culture can really play if need be. A colleague from the UK had this interesting theory about crisis, the different types of crisis he, as somebody from the UK, has lived through, the pandemia, Brexit, obviously, and then the Floyd case, racism. I think, and you made very strongly the case, what can we do to address all these issues? And again, I think what you also made very clear, and I think we all should really reflect about this, the pandemic has changed our world in a few weeks, and we have done blunt and bold decisions. And we've changed a lot of things. We've actually even improved certain things. And now there's a certain risk we fall back into this pre-pandemia and just go back to everything was before, and do not even keep the improvements we have introduced. So I thought it was an interesting thought. The colleague from Canada, you made a very interesting. Maybe you didn't make it, but at least I understood something from what you were saying. You said we need to emphasize, you said actually something, we need to redistribute to a certain extent our funding, because the way culture is funded in your country today, and probably that's true for most of the European countries as well, represents a society which is from the past, and a cultural reality which is from the past, which is very much based on traditional, classical, etc. And I think that's an interesting thought. But then I also think it's also a dangerous thought, because it is saying that we, government, and to a certain extent I feel like a representative of government, of EU, we should decide what's good or bad. Now, I know that you didn't mean that, but I think the danger is there that we would, we have, after all, politicians. Don't underestimate the ill will of politicians sometimes. I think that's a bit dangerous, to use money for, but we do it anyway. We spend money. I mean, we spend, as I told you, 2.4 billion euros in Europe. I know that nationally you spend billions for culture, and we make choices by doing that. But I think that's a debate to be held. We didn't have this debate today, obviously, but I think it's a thought which we need to have. But then he said something very interesting. Culture or art needs to be representing the totality of the population. And this brings us back to the first point on the Sami. It should not be a ghetto, and they should have their culture and then some folklore, and people come and see it and say, oh, that's nice. No, the new societies and all our societies have tremendously changed with immigration. over the last decades, all of our countries here as we speak. And there's a huge part of population who has not been born necessarily in the same culture where they grew up and where they live now. And that should actually not only, as one other colleague said, translate into food restaurants, but also into the nature of the culture in a given country. I think it's a very interesting thought. I guess it's happening slowly, but not fast enough. And then on the last one, this plenary, and there, bear with me, I didn't listen very much because I had to prepare this. There was no other time to do that. On artist working conditions, on this OMC, and it's good that, Heidi, you could explain this method because I think it's very interesting how we work in Europe on cultural affairs, because we are limited. There is no competence for the EU, and most of you will say, thanks God, there is no competence of the EU for culture, but we can still do a lot of things, such as this conference today. I think this is bringing people together, discussing these subjects would probably not happen outside this European Union context. Now, this brings me now to my last slide, which is again wrapping up. So what do we take away from this morning? Very interesting, I glanced to what Linnea was saying just a few moments ago, what artistic freedom means for her. It's being able to pay for her childcare to a certain extent, because that hinders her being an artist, because she cannot have the social conditions in order to be an artist. And again, coming back to Fatima of this morning, what means artistic freedom for her in her country, or the colleagues from Ukraine, where people were shot because they were not willing to perform for Russian troops or whatever. That there's a huge kind of distance between these two definitions of freedom of an artist, which we have been discussing and witnessing today. But I think what also comes through these debates this morning and this afternoon is, we can do a lot of things, and we should actually do a lot of things. This visa business, we can sort it out, and we should sort it out. Bureaucracy and all these problems, I think something can be done about it. Money, again, we're talking about little money when we talk about the money we spend for culture, or we need for culture. I will not forget your colleague, I don't know, was it you? I can't remember. But yesterday you said you get 20 million, you want 69 million, or 67? I know, million coronas, and I thought that must be possible, for Christ's sake. It's but I don't know, you're not getting it from me, but I just say, that's a solvable problem, kind of, no? But money is an issue, and we should be there. Now, this social security protection, that's, for Christ's sake, a scandal as well. And this is all over Europe. Some countries it's a little bit better than others, but this, we need to sort it out. There must be a way to sort it out. We cannot just continue saying every year, that's not good, it's really a drama, and COVID showed it is even worse, etc. That's something which can be done and which can be, I think, changed. Also, which was briefly touched upon in the last one, copyright issues, better protection of artists and their artwork. For Christ's sake, that can be done as well. And the change of attitudes in all this can be done as well. So that's it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you for ending on what can be done. And thank you for this attempt to summarize the day. Bear with me a few minutes. There are some practical information, but it's about things that are fun and slightly difficult tomorrow morning, but let's talk about that too. So Linnea mentioned Facit Bar, where a drink will be offered by Linnea and her record label. Is that correct? All right. Then Faucet bar you can find using your phones. It's FACIT. And as I understand, you will be there, so everyone can enjoy your company there. There is also the tour of the Umeå Arts Campus, and you had the leaflet distributed earlier. It's not far away, and you have it on your little map, walking map. But the thing is, with the arts, with the arts campus, is that there are many entrances. So I recommend you to walk together with us at 6:30. We're meeting at the accreditation desk. That's where you accredited yourself, 6:30. And then there will be a walk to the campus, and from there the tour begins. For those of you who do not have an opportunity of participating in the tour, you will be escorted to the dinner, which is also at the arts campus. And then you can meet at 7 o'clock at the accreditation desk, and the latecomers will be taken to the dinner. Important practical information that you have to make sure that you registered for the dinner, because if you haven't registered for the dinner hasn't been prepared for you. So please make sure that you registered, and if you're not sure about this, please talk to some of the organizers who are here, those who helped you registering in the very beginning, because they can clarify this if you're registered for the dinner or not. And then very important information about tomorrow. We have to check out before 10, which means that we have to check out before we arrive here in the morning. So please pack your suitcases and bags and bring them here. We have a room number 7, you will find it, which will act as a wardrobe during the whole day. So you just put your luggage in room 7. Don't leave it at the hotel, because they don't have the capacity for all of our bags. And room 7 will host your luggage until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So there's no problem leaving your luggage here for the entire day, depending on when you're leaving and what you're participating in. Is all of this clear? Yeah, that sounds good. We will have a very nice evening, and then we meet here again. Yes? Yes. 6:30. This is the information I have been given. That 6:30 at the accreditation desk, you will be met up and taken to the campus for the tour.
And it's outside, so it's...
Yeah, you need to have a coat, because the campus is not in this building. The campus is not in this building. And then we all meet here again tomorrow at 9. Big applause for all of us.